Today we're going to be talking with our Executive Director, Brian Hodge, about collecting works on paper. And I wanted to give a quick intro overview to the Printing Museum for those that aren't familiar with us. We are in Houston, Texas. We have been the Printing Museum for almost 40 years now, coming up on our 40th anniversary. Behind me in my virtual background is our lobby gallery. So not only are we a museum, we also have rotating exhibit space where we have special exhibits. We have the Hope is Action letterpress print exchange up right now. And if you come into the museum, right behind me to the other side would be our welcome gallery where we have our Renaissance and old master prints that are currently on display. All works on paper. It's a wonderful exhibit. I highly recommend you come by to see it. Since these are from our permanent collection, they're not always on display. So this is a treat to have them all out right now. And then the last kind of third component to our museum and galleries exhibit space is our working artist studios. So we also have a letterpress studio, a printmaking studio, a bookbindery, and a papermaking studio. So if you're able to come visit us, please do. We have a lot going on at the Printing Museum. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Brian today.
All right, thank you, Adrienne. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Start the presentation. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today. We'll be talking about collecting works on paper. I'll just give a brief introduction. I'm the executive director of the Printing Museum. I started collecting almost 20 years ago with collecting print by an artist named Sam Gilliam. And, actually bought it through eBay back then. Since then, I've just enjoyed just, perusing, shopping, if you will, but also getting to know and discover artists and trying to acquire and collect works that I enjoy. It's been great to also put those up in the house and share those with family and friends who visit. So today we'll just be going through how to get started. It's easier than ever, and it's not really all that intimidating nowadays. So just an overview of what we'll be discussing, like why collect art in the first place. There are many different reasons. We'll be discussing the various types of works on paper and getting started and taking care of your arts. And we'll end with the Q&A. So you can put them in the chat, or you can, once we get to that section of the presentation, then you can unmute yourself and ask questions as well. So why collect art? As I mentioned, I got involved because I actually majored in art in college. I wanted to be a painter, but I took a different path and studied graphic design. And my first job was actually working at a museum. And so I got to do what I was passionate about in terms of design, but also work in a place where it was just so much great art on the wall. So, I started thinking wouldn't it be cool to collect? I had no idea how to go about it. Obviously, when I worked in the museum, the pieces on view were mostly very expensive that I couldn't afford on my meager salary. But I just was looking for ways to start collecting, and this was in the rise of the internet, and eBay and galleries started posting stuff online. So I got involved mostly because I enjoy art. I enjoyed working in a setting that had a lot of art. So that's why I got started. But some people also support, they enjoy supporting arts and culture. So the process of, meeting and talking with artists, sometimes they even, they enjoy the process of collecting, of supporting galleries, supporting museums through the donation of artwork to museums. a lot of people do it because they enjoy living with art, right? They like to see it on display. They like to share with friends and family when they come over, and share their passion again for what they enjoy about the art or the artist. And then another reason to collect, some people collect for investment purposes, right? Um, we won't really be talking so much about that because again, this is this is really designed to be about the beginning stages of collecting. Um, as you may get more into it, you may see them more as an investment, but really it's about discovering the joy of living with art and experiencing it every day and starting to build a collection. So, what constitutes a work on paper? There are three main types: drawing, a print or limited edition, and photographs. Today, we'll be talking about strictly about drawings and prints, not so much about photographs. And what is a drawing? So, really, a drawing is anything, I would say, in the art world is considered anything that's on a piece of paper. Uh, so we're familiar with pencil, charcoal, pen and ink, watercolor, gouache, and even acrylic or oil, when applied to paper, could be considered a drawing as opposed to a painting, right? So paintings typically are considered works on canvas. And I have an example here of what a pencil drawing would look like on paper by Jacob Smits. Here's an example of a charcoal drawing. This is charcoal and Conte crayon by Berthe Morisot. An example of watercolor. I won't dare pronounce this name, but generally they're considered sketches mostly, right? That these are often studies. Artists would use these materials as a way to do studies for larger works that might be in oil or acrylic. Other works on paper are prints, limited editions, or editioned work. They don't necessarily have to be limited. They can be open. We'll get into that later. But they include relief printing, such as woodcuts or linoleum or block printing, and intaglio printing, such as engraving and etching, lithograph, serigraph, or screen print, monoprint, and digital G-clay printing. Oops, sorry. So a woodcut, I'll talk a little bit about process. A woodcut is essentially an artist would use sharp tools to cut away the negative space in their work and thus raise the positive image so that it can be inked and put through a press. So you can see here the artist is cutting away, they've kind of drawn on the surface and they're cutting away the negative space, right? The parts of the wood block that they don't want to print. Woodcuts generally started in Asia. We have some great woodcuts in our Old Master Prints exhibition that's on view in the Welcome Gallery at the museum. So you can see that. But generally, it's very hard to get a lot of detail because the process of cutting wood can be quite difficult. You do need sharp implements. So to get fine detail, it might be good to use a different process. So here's an example of a woodcut by Albert Dürer that's currently on view at the museum. This is the Martyrdom of St. Catherine. He was kind of the master of creating such detail in his studio. Another process is engraving. This is where, again, using sharp tools, an artist would carve deep indentations into a copper plate and then kind of like squeegee the surface with an ink and then rub away the excess. So the ink is actually embedded in the grooves, and that process, that plate along with paper is pushed through a press at a very high pressure, and the paper actually gets pressed into the groove and picks up that ink. We have an example here of also what's on display. Again, a lot more detail than you would see in a woodcut, typical woodcut. This is a naval battle scene by Pietro Santobartoli from the 17th century. A similar process as engraving is an etching, again, into some kind of metal plate, in this case, copper. And the process of cross-hatching allowed artists to get more detail. So you could add shading, a lot more shading than you possibly could with an engraving and a woodcut. So again, in this process, the ink is pushed into the grooves in the metal plate. And with etching in particular, there's a dry process, but there's also a chemical kind of bath process where they apply a chemical that kind of prepares the surface before it again is put through a press with paper at high pressure. We have an example of a old master print that's on view by Herman van Swanvelt. So again, a lot more detail than you've seen in the previous examples. And this is an excellent example of a landscape etching of that period. The process of lithography was developed in the late 18th century, whereby an artist would take a stone surface, this is like limestone, and they would basically draw on it with a grease pencil. So it's kind of like a hydrophobic process. So the grease pencil has oil in it. And then there's a chemical process where they apply a chemical that treats the surface, and then the ink will then get applied to that, and then it gets run through a press again with a sheet of paper, and makes a reverse image of what's here on display. So this is an example of a lithography stone with an image that's been drawn on the surface. And here's an example of a print by John Biggers, a notable artist from the Houston area who started the art department at Texas Southern University. So very much you can see like the detail work here. This is a one color lithograph. It almost looks like a pencil drawing, but it's not a pencil drawing because if I were able to zoom in, you would see that it's an addition work. And there are many different processes to apply an image to a stone. So anywhere you can get a stone, an image on a stone, whether through direct drawing or even sometimes artists will silkscreen on a stone. We'll go through that, what that process is like. Screen printing or serigraph is a type of print where a photosensitive chemical is applied to a screen, and then an image is usually burned through the exposure of light. And that image is usually printed out on some kind of clear acetate. There are other different ways to create an image on a screen, but that's one of the main ways that they do it. And you can see this is the part of the process where the artist is applying the actual screen print ink and is pressing it through the little holes in the screen to the paper beneath. I did not include an example of that because I think pretty much people are familiar with like t-shirt printing, what screen printing is all about. Another process is called monoprinting, using a similar process to the similar process of like printing, but the actual image making is done directly on like a glass or plexiglass plate. You can see an example here where an artist has applied different colors of ink. Uh, and then it's run through the press, and there's only one impression that's able to be made. Thus, it's called a monoprint. And then finally, with the digital revolution, artists are able to create prints using a digital process. Sometimes can be referred to as giclée, which is a French term, which actually means like the spraying of ink. So there's a high resolution scan, and it can be printed pretty much on any surface, paper, even canvas. So that's a little bit about the various printmaking processes that are currently being used today. There's certainly more things that artists do to their prints in the process or to their drawings, but we're not really going so much into that. But next up, we really talk about how would one get started. Earlier, I talked about why people collect. I think it's important when you're thinking about collecting to really determine why. The why can change over time, but at least when you're starting, it might be a good idea to think about, okay, what am I interested in? What do I really enjoy looking at? And then to go about researching. We'll talk about budgets and then where to buy after that in more detail. So I am always a fan of research. And one of the principal ways you can research art is through books, right? So exhibition catalogs, gallery catalogs are a great resource to learn about art, learn about artist processes. There are lots of also online tools. Artists are posting on Instagram or videos on YouTube or on their own websites about their process. But by and large, having a good catalog or art book collection goes kind of hand in hand with having a good art collection. So, and they're much cheaper. So I was once told, if you can't afford the art, buy the book. So I was looking at my bookshelf. I was like, yeah, I can't afford a Chuck Close, but I have a Chuck Close catalog, and I enjoy looking at my Chuck Close catalog from time to time. So again, if you can't buy the artwork, at least try to buy the book. The other thing is nowadays, exhibition catalogs or artist monographs are printed in such small quantities that over time your book actually could increase in value because it goes out of print. So that's another reason to delve into researching through books. Highly recommend going to galleries and museums. Galleries and museums put a lot of effort into presenting artists' work, and it's always a great place to discover new artists, new art forms, new ways of art making. Along with that, I would say people are now going to art fairs. So we all know the big art fairs like Art Basel, the Armory Show in New York City. Every major town, including Houston, has art fairs throughout the year, and that's where galleries bring artwork for sale to the public. So I highly recommend visiting as many art galleries and museums and art fairs as you can, because it also gives you an opportunity to talk to people, especially at art fairs and galleries. Galleries are always interested in meeting potential new collectors. So they also have more liberty to discuss, an artist's motivation or what they're trying to do in their So I highly recommend that. There are also a lot of online resources to research art and artists. You can certainly find auction results online. Mutual Art is also they kind of catalog auction results from around the world, and you can kind of set up artists that you're following and get auction alerts when a work has been sold. Artsy is one of my favorite online tools for research. They have an app, mobile app, and you can follow artists. And every time a gallery or museum posts a show or an auction house posts a work for an upcoming auction, you can get an alert on your phone, on your like kind of home screen, and you can choose to follow that work or follow the artist and get updates when, when a work comes up for auction, for example. There's also ArtNet, which does post some auction results, but is more like a online magazine. So there's a lot of editorial coverage of the art world, of artists, of galleries, and museums, exhibitions. And then another resource is artist websites. A lot of artists, it's never easier than today to post a website. So lots of artists are posting their own websites and putting up their artist statements, posting images of their artwork as well as their CV. That's principally where I go to learn like where an artist may have trained, where they're exhibiting, and also in their CV, usually they will post, where they're being collected. So which institutions are collecting them. I would also say gallery websites do a good job of this as well. So you can visit any gallery website and look under the artists they represent, and usually they will have the artist CV, and you can quickly scan that to learn more about the artist. And now a lot of people are using Instagram to find art and artists. So artists again are posting images of their artwork or their process, and there are crazy stories of people who are selling, art on the street and made a couple posts to Instagram, and next thing you know, they have major gallery representation in the finest galleries in Europe. So, and then auction results. So anything can happen. It's a great place to discover and share art and artists. So I'd recommend, I don't want to talk too much about money, but when it comes to collecting, you definitely want to establish how much you're willing to spend. Particularly, what I like to do is like, I have in my mind, like, what's the max I'm willing to spend on an artwork, a single piece? And I probably need to think more about what I'm willing to spend per year. So I really focus on probably right now just the max I'm willing to spend per work, and I kind of use that as a way to calibrate my collecting activity throughout the year. If you happen to have a partner, it's always a good idea to discuss and share your collecting plans, and even include them in the process. And then when it comes to establishing a budget, one of the things that, is not readily known is that galleries, if you go to a gallery to purchase a piece, don't be afraid to ask for a discount. They do have a hefty commission and are willing to offer discounts to customers, to patrons. And then the other thing is they're also willing to offer terms. These things aren't necessarily advertised on their website, but you can say, hey, can I have a couple months or a year to pay off this work, especially if you really fall in love with the piece and it is above your kind of max dollar amount you're willing to spend it at any given time. You can ask a gallery to say for a couple months to pay it off. So where to buy? There are plenty of places. Before the internet, it was all retail at galleries and auction houses. And nowadays, you can do it from the comfort of your home, from your couch. You can can participate in auctions um, through various apps. I've just listed some. These are not endorsements. These are just some that are, are most widely known and offer a wide selection of works. Again, online platforms. Artsy is I think, is a useful online platform uh, for connecting with galleries and also to keep an eye on auctions. Live Auctioneers is a website. They do also have a mobile app. It's strictly auction related, and they really cover everything. So furniture and jewelry, and any type of collectible is on Live Auctioneers. And as I mentioned, galleries are a great place to collect art, to start a process. You also can, they're a great resource because you can actually ask questions and get them answered. And you don't have to be limited to the galleries in your immediate vicinity. Thanks to the internet, you can collect art from around the world. In fact, I'm working with a gallery in Germany right now that's representing an artist I really like. It's a small work, not very expensive, and they're willing to give me terms. So that's a great avenue to start collecting. Art fairs, again, I mentioned before, is a great place to go. Galleries generally tend to go there. Art fairs come in all shapes and sizes. The big ones like Art Basel, the work is very expensive. But there are also smaller art fairs in cities around the world. And even in Houston, there's a Texas Contemporary art fair. There's one in Austin. Some are specifically devoted to prints. They're always good to check out, and they all usually have good online presences. They allow galleries to post kind of sub-galleries of artists and artwork. So you can kind of discover there without actually having to go. And you can still, they're all willing to communicate online with you as well, even during the art fair. So another place that most people may not know about are art centers. So, when we talk about art centers, I'm talking specifically like printmaking workshops. So like the Lower East Side printmaking workshop, in New York City, artists come there to create works. Like sometimes artists don't have access to their own printmaking facilities in their studio, so they will go to art centers to create limited edition prints. Another one I'm thinking of is Crown Point Press in California. They also allow artists to come. They also publish prints, so they will ask an artist or kind of like commission an artist to create a limited edition, and they sell them on their websites. I've often found good deals at art centers. I actually found one, an artist that I'd already collected. I found one, another piece of theirs at Vermont Art Studio. I'd never heard of it before, but someone was like, hey, you need to check this out. So, I did and was able to buy a very affordable limited edition of an artist I already liked. Another avenue is our benefit auctions. Oftentimes, artists will donate works to an institution like an art center or a museum to support the museum in a philanthropic way. So I can think of the Houston Center for Photography does an annual art auction. Art League Houston does one. These are local institutions that offer some kind of benefit auction during the year. You can often find very accessible, affordable works through those avenues. And then ultimately, you can go directly to artists in most instances. It takes a little bit of effort, but again, it means reaching out through their artist website or through Instagram, Some artists have agreements with their galleries that they can't sell through their studio. Um, but nowadays, not as many artists have gallery representation. So never be too afraid to ask or to reach out to an artist and say, I'm interested to learn more. Can I stop by your studio? They don't really get that a lot. So it's always a great avenue to talk directly to artists and hear directly from them. The other thing, when you start doing a lot of research and you start seeing auction results, you may see a piece you're interested in, but you may be concerned about the price. Like, how do you know the value, right? Well, it's more art than science, right? There are a lot of things that go into determining the value of a piece. A lot of it has to do with the reputation of the artist. So if you wanted to collect, Andy Warhol prints, for example, even though there's a huge supply of them, a lot of people want to collect Andy Warhol prints. So that contributes to a high valuation. So combination of artist reputation, the supply of work that you're interested in, the size of the piece is a big factor. Obviously, smaller works are usually less expensive, and medium. So, works on paper are more accessible than, say, a canvas or a sculpture. So, a lot of factors go into it, and it's more, again, it's more of an art for a gallery or an artist to determine their pricing. It's really a negotiation. So think of it like a bazaar where you can haggle a little bit on price. Most people are willing to work with you because they really want to have as many people collecting your artwork as possible. So don't be afraid to ask questions and ask for a discount or terms. So moving on to taking care of works on paper. At the Printing Museum, you have, like I said, we have old master prints on display. They tend to be, the older a piece gets, the more fragile it becomes. But generally, the enemies of any work on paper is light, moisture, and adhesives. So you want to try to limit your light exposure. And obviously, Houston's a little bit challenging with moisture because of the humidity. And try not to use tape. I know it's a crazy thing, but it's a simple thing that really can really impact the long-term health of your piece. So our recommendation, and I'm going to tell you, you should try to frame as much as you can. That's the best way to preserve a piece, and frame it and put it on the wall. That's the best advice we can give. And when you frame, there are a couple things you should know. One, you shouldn't hang artwork in direct sunlight. Okay, and if you have no choice, I think in all instances you should use museum glass. Museum glass has special UV filters. It filters out those harmful rays that damage not only the paper but also the color of the ink or media that's being used. And then always try to use acid-free mats. Mats there are very expensive mats and there are very cheap mats. And usually the cheap mats have I've seen some mats that actually have acid. They're not acid-free. And that's insane if you're putting it up against, on top of a work on paper, because eventually the acid from those mats is going to discolor your work and damage it and diminish the value over time. If you're like me and have more work than you actually have walls, well, I have wall space, but I have an issue with clutter. But I don't have everything framed. So what do? So we recommend flat files. They are available in mostly online, but flat storage that protects it from light. And you want to, if you can't do that, acid-free archival boxes, they're usually the gray ones, they're white on the inside. Those are the best ways to store. You want to be careful about not storing them. You want to store them in a climate-controlled area. So again, back to the humidity issue, it's always best to try to maintain in your storage area, if you can, around 50% relative humidity. Yes. And you don't want to put them especially in Houston, which is prone to flooding, you don't want to put them near windows or any area where they could possibly come into contact with water. So not near windows, not on the ground floor, not in the basement, not near your furnace, not near the water heater. You really want to find a place that offers the best protection for your works on paper as possible. Even if you, I've had this happen, so I buy a piece and the gallery or the organization sends it in a cardboard shipping container, right? They may put it in plastic, but a little bit of, say you don't seal the plastic pouch all the way, it is possible for acid from the cardboard box to actually discolor your work, even when it's inside plastic. So you just want to be very careful when you collect or when you acquire things, works on paper, to always protect it as best as you can, and keep it as far away from materials and papers and other materials that have acid. So that's it for the formal part. I'd be open to questions. I'm going to stop sharing. See a little bit of the chat.
Yeah, so feel free to unmute yourselves too, add to the conversation, any questions, comments. Matt had shared that Burning Bones Press locally is having a print fair this weekend. So that was, perfect timing, worth mentioning. Thanks for sharing that, Matt.
I'd also like to mention that I know this presentation is about works on paper, but whatever you want to collect, this could be for anything, right? If you're collecting stamps, or really look into learning as much as you can about how to take care of them, whatever you collect. Any kind of collection can bring you joy, right? And in a lot of cases, even these weird collections of things can become museums, right? So there are people who oh gosh, I can't remember, but these really weird things that people collect can, bring joy and delight to not just the person who's collecting it, but also to the public. So whatever you enjoy collecting or hoarding can be a source of joy for people, especially if you take care of
it. Brian, thank you for that. That was really helpful, and you answered a lot of my questions. I have a few more.
Sure.
Just to follow up on the acid, if it's had contact with cardboard in the past, but it's been remedied, is there still a risk that discoloration will happen in the future because it had contact in the past? Or is it just if it continues to maintain contact with acid?
That's a good question. Adrian, would you know?
That is a really good question, and I don't know precisely because that is a very yes, it's a real good example too. But I don't know. The best thing I think definitely remove it from the source, the acid. Um, I think that is the number one immediate main treatment about remediating the acid already in the paper. I know that is possible with doing some buffering. I just don't know how common a practice or how necessary that is.
Okay, thank you. And then can y'all offer any advice on, I have my first piece on paper, but it's oil paint. And I don't really know anything about oil paint, except that I've heard that it takes the old masterworks like centuries to dry. So like, I just haven't known like if I can go ahead and frame it, if it's been sitting out for a couple of months, or if it needs a mat so it's not touching the glass. Like how do I care for oil on paper?
That is a good question. Definitely, you want to mat it or suspend it, like hang it, float the piece. You never want the glass to touch your artwork. Um, it's just a best practice. So it all depends on what your framing kind of preferences are. Probably, I would say there is an adhesive tape that's used in floating that, again, while it may be archival, it may damage the work more than, say, sandwiching it between two acid-free mats.
Okay. And then did I understand you just now to say that all paper should not touch the glass or just the oil paint paper?
Just the paper that has the artwork on it, right?
But like the prints and stuff are okay to touch glass or not?
I wouldn't. No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't have any artwork touching the glass.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no artwork touching
Okay. I'm glad to know that. And then can y'all offer any advice about, because you were talking about storing,
glass.
and I have some of mine stored, but I also have some that I feel like I'm ready to rehome. How do you rehome prints?
By rehome, you mean
Like I'm just not, I don't want them in my collection anymore. I'm ready for them to move on, but I'd like for them to go to someone who appreciates them. And I guess I just don't know where to look for a network to offer them to.
are you trying to sell them or are you just gifting?
Um, I'm not picky. I just want them to go to a good home.
Okay, that's a great question. So actually, you can consign, if you're interested in selling them, you can consign them through auction houses. Most auction houses have specialists and whose information is public, and they say, "Are you interested in consigning?" And it's helpful to. Actually, I didn't cover this, but keeping records of where you got the artwork from. So like the invoice, even a check, like if you wrote a check, anything related to how you acquired the piece, as much detail as you can about the piece. So like usually when you acquire a piece, they give you all like the medium, the year, all that. You forward that in a decent image to the specialist, and they will get back to you if they're interested in including that in an upcoming auction. Um, you're welcome to gift it to individuals, like someone like I don't recommend doing that though. I mean, if it's of value and if it meant something to you at some point in time, unless it's like family, I really wouldn't gift it to a stranger or even a friend for that matter if you don't know like if they're going to take care of it. Um, and then there's always institutions, so like museums accept donations of artwork. Again, usually they have a collections committee that makes the decision. So it may take a while to do that, to like get an answer.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate all that.
And then we had a question in the chat about finding a local paper conservator that they've used. I don't know personally of a paper conservator, but that is a great question because yes, I would recommend somebody that does specialize in paper conservation for any of these, because works can be so specialized. Works on paper versus works on painting, you are dealing with different substrates, so it does matter. There are book conservators in the area as well, if you happen to have a book. But so locally, it's a little trickier, but I would go to the national organization, which is the American Institute for Conservation. And they have a great find a conservator, and you could put in like the details or criteria, what you're looking for, as well as the region. I know this trade and this skill gets harder and harder to find. And so sometimes you might need to look within the greater Texas area. The paper conservator I know is in Dallas Fort Worth, Tish Brewer, and she does great work. But again, not in Houston. So it also depends on where you are, where you're calling in from. So if there's other people on the call that aren't in Houston, that's a great place, gives you a lot of options. Yes, and Cheryl Caraba in Austin is also excellent. Thanks for putting that in the chat, Tam. Well, I love the questions, especially Hillary, getting excited about what y'all are collecting. I hope this has been helpful. And I'm sure if you guys think of other questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. We still got a few more minutes on the hour. Thanks for joining us today as well.
Yeah, I would also say, if you ever have questions about things, don't be afraid to contact museums either. Like, the printing museum has a very specific type of collection. we get questions mostly about equipment. So, or research, like information, people needing information about a specific piece of equipment that we, asking if we have books about them and how to use them or how to repair them. And so it's always a challenge, but yeah, don't be afraid to, if you can find contact information of like someone.
Exactly. If we don't know, we're great at trying to find who to connect you with or who would know.
Yeah, like in the curator's office or like the MFH has conservators, so they may not return your call, but but at least I think most people and most institutions really take caring for work seriously, so they want to help people. So don't be afraid to contact places that you think are not accessible.
Yes, yeah. Just thinking about it, the Manil brand new Drawing Institute has a great conservation studio, so they probably do have recommendations as well.
Well, if there are no more questions,
Well, yeah. I think you did a great job kind of covering everything. Thanks, Brian.
My pleasure.
Yeah, this was fantastic. I learned so much and I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. We hope to also, we want to do more of these. Like, I'm really interested in starting to collect books. So, and I don't know much about it. So we would like to probably schedule one with experts who can help guide people.
Yeah, and upcoming events, we also will have Matt Adams talking, one of our docents talking about book review for The Bookseller of Florence. And so we are looking forward to that coming up here soon, July 7th. We'll also be celebrating Juneteenth at the Printing Museum this Saturday. And I think that's about it for me. All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us today. We will have this recording and we will add it to our YouTube channel so that if anyone missed it, they are able to make use of it as well. And thank you all for joining us, for the questions, the discussions. Really loved it. Thank you all. Enjoy your day.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.